Can you get ops without the Git? Because that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about using OCI as source of truth and its impact on software delivery with Argo CD. I am your host, Dan Garfield. Welcome to another episode of Argo Unpacked. I am not joined today by my co-host, Ravital, who is on vacation, heaven forbid. And instead, I am bringing on an old friend and an excellent addition and part of the DNA really of this show as it goes back to Get Off the Planet and some other shows. Welcome, Christian Hernandez, Argo contributor and GitOps contributor as well over the years. Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted yourself.
I'll say I muted myself to be polite, and then like as I started, it's always the case. You would think we would get used to this, at some point, right? One day. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on. It's it's nice and sunny here in Los Angeles.
Oh,
So
man.
it's I know you're up in Utah with the
It's
it
nice
has
and
it
sunny up here too
is
right
it is
now.
it
I mean, we're in full summer, but I do kind of wish I was in LA, maybe enjoying the beach today.
it is a nice beach day as
Getting some
well.
tacos
So
on the beach. It's the way to
yes,
be.
it's the way to go. Yes.
So today we're talking about OCI as source of truth, and this is something that goes back a bit of ways. Actually, I think that just to introduce first of all what it is.
Mhm.
Actually, Christian, why don't you introduce what is OCI as source of truth?
Yeah, so just to kind of like pull it back just a little bit, right? The way you store like I think container images, right, is kind of like a generic way to kind of like store data, right? And so um I think once you give someone like a tool or anything like that, it's like, hey, this is kind of like storage. It's like, well, what else can we do with it other than just like container images, right? And so OCI is a way to store with respect to like GitOps, right? Like, so if we're gonna like focus in on GitOps, is a way to store manifests in a container registry, right? The same registry as you would like store container images. You can store other things, right? And in our world, that means like manifests, right? That means like Helm charts. That means raw YAML, right? We, in GitOps, I think we all speak YAML. So that's kind of like a way to like store those manifests, right, in a GitOps compliant way, right? So like both you and I were the Open GitOps group, right? We're like, okay, like is it GitOps compliant? And yes, it is, right? Like just because we're not using Git, right? We were using this other method, it's still compliant, right, to the GitOps principles. So and it this kind of like I think and don't want to get too ahead of myself, but kind of like opens up a kind of like a whole new avenue, a whole new use cases when you can start storing things in a way that is kind of like a generic payload type of way.
Yeah.
I think it kind of opens up, a whole set of use cases.
Well, it kind of goes back to some of the traditional ways that deployment was done, where if you were using an artifact as your
Yep.
deployment tool, there's all kinds of optimizations that have been built around artifact storage and retrieval. And to give an example, if we go back to the old days where you would maybe send out a big binary to be downloaded on all your targets at once, well, suddenly if you have like 10,000 targets that are downloading that artifact,
Yep.
you're suddenly doing a distributed denial of service attack on yourself, right? So this was a challenge. I think people called it a swarming effect back in the day.
Yeah.
And so there's all those toolings have been built, with Artifactory and others that allow replication of repositories for binary distribution. And we can just be really efficient with binary distribution. Whereas Git, there are Git tools that allow you to do mirroring. GitLab lets you do Git mirroring, though I don't think actually that it is currently supported in Argo CD. And so some of the tooling for distributing these deployments has been more developed with OCI. And OCI also allows you to do things like container signing. You can sign the object, and so you can do a signature verification on the object. Now with Git, of course, you can verify the commit, and you can have verified commits and signed commits and stuff like that. But it's just a little bit different, and there's just some different tooling that's been developed around it. So a lot of people have wanted the ability to use OCI as a source of truth. At the same time, you mentioned Helm charts were one of the first things that people started adding into OCI. So OCI, Open Container Initiative,
I believe it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And basically taking what Docker had done and making it generic, so you could have any kind of container, not necessarily a Docker container. You could have a Rocket container or whatever other kind of container you were running. You could store those objects inside of an OCI registry. And at the same time, we were storing Helm charts in their own thing, Chart Museum, or we would use S3 buckets directly.
Yep.
And people started to say, hey, these kind of things, it's just a bundled binary. why can't I store that inside of the same place where I store a Docker registry? So you've got Helm charts were the first big thing that people started pushing really into these places. And so Argo CD supported the ability to point at a Helm chart from an OCI repository, but it was kind of limited. A lot of that support wasn't really fully built out. And so the initiative and the proposal was undertaken last year, led, I want to say, by Andrew. I think really kicked it off.
I think it was Andrew from Red Hat was.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you ultimately wrote the proposal, posted the proposal, but like it was really led like Andrew. I know.
Yeah, Andrew Block was the heavy lifter there. Yeah, and started recruiting people to work on it, and then I think really Blake Peterson's the one that really stepped up to do the most heavy lifting on actual implementation of it. So big shout out to Blake. But now we're at a state where you can point at an OCI registry as their source of truth. And I think, is this, let's clarify, is this the same as just, okay, I can reference Helm charts, or is this really all about rendered manifests? Because you could potentially put that into an object as well.
Yeah. And I think that's where for me, the biggest use case was around rendered manifests, right? And so I'm a big fan of rendered manifests, a big fan of using that sort of framework. And just to kind of step back a little bit and do, whoever's watching, right? Like if they don't know what rendered manifest is, that some people call it hydration, rendered manifest, same idea, but basically Argo will, you can just like give it, a repository, right? So like customize or like Helm, right? But like how that ends up on the cluster, Argo actually runs, whatever, what we call it, whatever config management plugin or the config management, tooling does, right? There's plugins as well. You can just not only do customize or Helm, but basically, Argo will on the fly do a customized build, for example, or they'll do a Helm template, right? And then, taking what you have and kind of rendering that out, right? Or, taking your dry, don't repeat yourself, manifests, right, and hydrating those, right? So like, so that using all the terminology, so that way people can get, but like you basically, Argo will render those out, right? And so I'm a big, which, I think over the years, Argo has gotten better and better, right? As more people use it and we get more contributions, right? But initially, like if you had something like a monorepo, or like if you had a really busy system on a monorepo, that can take its toll on the repository server, right? The actual controller that actually does the rendering.
Yeah.
And so there was a method set up. It's like, well, like let's kind of push the that rendering, that push that to like closer to CI, or like before Argo actually touches it. So then that way Argo is just working with raw manifests. There's no way to there's no need for it to actually render those out, like have that compute happen on CI. And then that's kind of like what rendered manifests are. And we have the rendered manifest, you need like a place to store it, right? You need a place to like, okay, I rendered these out, like where do I put it, right? And so I think this practice came out of Intuit, where we'll just write the rendered manifest into a deployment branch, right? And that's kind of like where that first idea, or at least for me in my head, I go, oh, okay, like this isn't like a feature branch, or it's treated more like an artifact, right? Like back in my head, I'm like, oh, it's kind of like an artifact. It's like a deployable thing. It's in Git. It's in a branch, right? We're just kind of leveraging the branch as a method to store these manifests. And so I think now with that support of OCI, it's like, okay, well, now instead of just like putting it in Git, right, I can just put it in OCI. I can put it into an OCI registry, right? So instead of like rendering it into a branch, I can render it, into an OCI registry, right? And then from there, now you actually have, like you said before, you kind of have this payload. You have this manifest, this artifact, right? This artifact that is version immutable, kind of like, oh, okay, and then I can just then take this and deploy it in multiple locations, right? So like if you're gonna if you have multi-region, multi-location kind of clusters, it's like, okay, this is my dev version right? Then I'm gonna, or version 1.2.1 or whatever, right? Like whatever your scheme is. I can deploy that as an artifact almost. My manifest is now I'm treating it as an artifact, right? Like I'm treating my source of truth as a deployable thing. So
Well,
I think that's one of my favorite parts of OCI and rendered manifests.
oh, absolutely. Well, and it's funny because it also exposes something that is very it's sort of funny. When you use Argo CD, it has all these tools built in to help you modify your manifest. So you can, in your application spec, you can pass values to a Helm chart, so it will render with those values. If you're using an application set, you can pass in those values to have them rendered in. There's even a plugin. There's an Argo CD Vault plugin that will call Vault during manifest generation to pull in secrets or values and inject them into the manifest. And the funny thing about those tools is they're very convenient. So when you're first start using Argo CD, they're very convenient to use. You can just grab a Helm chart, pass in some values, call it a day. But the more mature you get on Argo, at least from my view, the more you stop using all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
The more you get to say, actually, I just want my manifest to be exactly as they are. I'll have some server side values potentially in like a secret that's being managed with its own life cycle that I can reference. But I actually don't want to have those configurations maybe living as much inside of Argo CD. I want to handle that manifest generation its own way. And so we actually have gone on to discourage people from adding lots of arguments in their applications manifests. But as you mentioned, this pattern that's come from Intuit, which was rendering them with CI, committing them to a branch. Well, what's the advantage of that? Because Intuit didn't do it for scaling reasons. It wasn't for the purpose of giving relief to repo server. It was just because I want to know exactly what manifest is being applied, and I want to be able to do a diff between multiple environments. And if I render those each to different branches, I can reference them and do a diff. And of course, we also recommend not to use branches for environments. We encourage people to use folders, but that's not because of something inherently wrong with branches. It's because the interface for changes should be happening with folders instead of branches. Because when you're trying to make changes across branches and compare them and merge across branches, it's not designed for that. Like Git, like the whole point of sort of using like trunk-based development, you don't have long-running branches that have differences that are supposed to be live with each other. So we're actually fine with using different branches for storing manifests when the interface is folders and somewhere else.
Yeah, and it should always that interface. Like I think that's a perfect way to put it. Right, it's like your interface. Right, you're not really doing anything with these branches, right? Like kind of like what Intuit was doing was
those
like
are automated, fully.
Yeah,
automated.
those are automated. Yeah. That's like I still work within the folders, but I think you're right. I think what's great about Argo CD is like you can just get up and running like in a few commands, right? Like, and then you can just kind of quote unquote do what you want, right? Like the user experience is great, right? But like as you said, as you mature into like we should one day we should like create a maturity model or something. But like as you're as you're maturing, like you kind of like rely less and less on doing like environments with different values inside the application spec, right? Like the application spec, like your first application spec is really large, and like as you mature, it actually gets smaller and smaller, right? Because like you're like all that logic is in like in CI, and like you're you're using folders, and you're rendering those manifests, and then all of that, like the complexity actually is outside of Argo CD, because Argo CD is, as many of you know, is it takes care of that last mile, right? And it's like really really great for that last mile. Like it's fantastic for that last part.
Well, and that actually reminds me, there's kind of a lingering, I don't hear people talk about it, but there's a lingering gap actually with the rendered manifest pattern, because if you're not using rendered manifest, you're comparing dry manifest to dry manifest. So you're saying, show me the chart values and compare the chart values that are being passed. And those a single value change inside of a Helm chart may have huge implications on what the manifests actually render.
Yep.
And so when you're comparing dry manifests, you may be missing part of the story. So we have this rendered manifest pattern, and it's now Argo CD now supports, I think it's an alpha still, the ability to have it render those out to a separate Git target branch, so you can do diffing on offline. So that diffing is much more comprehensive, but it probably gets you 95%. It doesn't get you 100% because you still have server side changes that can happen because you have controllers that are running and making modifications. And so unless you do a server side render, you actually maybe don't get 100% diff, but it's probably fine because the server side controllers and stuff that are happening, the injection that might be happening is maybe like Kyverno's adding some labels, or
there's like some
whatever.
mutating webhook that happens that exactly that are in play, and which I think just like for that's why the Argo UI is like it will never not be important, because yes, you have like this server side thing, like you said, like rendered manifest gives you like 95, and I would even say 95 is kind of generous percent of the way there. But like to actually see, like if you want to like see like, like you said, like there's a Kyverno policy that gets applied and you want to see how that looks, like that's not going to appear like in your rendered manifest, right? Whether you store it in Git or an OCI, like you're not going to see it there, right? Like you'll see it at runtime.
No, and it's usually not a problem, right? Like most of the problem happens in the unrendered manifests, in just the dry manifest. That's most of the stuff that happens. But when you're debugging something, sometimes you really need a better diff, and so that rendered manifest becomes really useful. And then very rarely does it become there's a webhook that's mutating and changing the values as they're being applied. But if you don't understand that model and you're trying to debug something, it may lead you into situations where you're like, hey, there's no diff here, it's broken, I don't understand why. So you just need to know, like, okay, I might need to actually take out the server side rendered manifest to see what the modifications are and compare them that way, because presumably the server side modifications I will be ignoring differences on. When I add Kyverno, I'm going to add in ignore differences for the components that it's adding on the server side, so that Argo CD isn't trying to fight the controller. And so very easy for a new user or even a reasonably experienced user of Argo CD not to realize that what they're looking at in the diff may not fully capture what's actually happening server side. But a little bit of a digression from the OCI. Now, on the OCI side, we've talked about this in rendered manifest terms, but OCI support, I think, did we reach stable on that feature? Is it considered stable now, or is it still a beta feature?
It's still beta. It's going to be beta feature, I think, until like the next version, right?
Well, 3.1's coming out in like next week.
Yeah, like next week. Yeah. So it'll be
stable in 3.1?
In 3.2, I believe.
In 3.2, okay.
Yeah. So it'll be there when 3.1 comes out. Again, everyone, please try the RC. It's been unusually quiet for the RC, which makes me a little nervous. But I was actually talking with who was I talking with? I forget. I'm better with faces than with names here. She works at CodeFresh, and I'm like completely Regina.
Oh, Reggie?
Yeah, Reggie. Yeah. So I was talking with her, and she goes, "Well, technically, I think 3.2's RC is going to be big because that's when we're going to deprecate 2.x."
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, I wonder when when that announcement comes out, like when we actually say, hey, by the way, 3.2, we're deprecating 2.x. So I think a lot more testing is going to happen there. We might get more noise there, but doesn't mean you anyone watching this, please try out 3.1 RC, right? Because the only way to find these bugs that we may have missed is to actually try it and see how it works. But yeah, no, so it's supposed to beta in 3.1 and go full hog 3.2.
Yeah,
Blake's putting
this
up
will be exciting
a
for
lot of
people to
work on
start
it.
trying out. And
Yeah.
the intention, and I actually I did look at the PR last month that Blake was working on there briefly, but I don't remember it now super well. And so the original proposal for OCI is that it would support not just rendered manifests, but also Helm, also customize, and that there would be like a metadata component you could add for that. So I don't know if how close we are in that, but the rendered part I know has had a fair bit of testing on it. And
Yep.
the other component of this, we mentioned that you can store it in an OCI registry in a GitOps compliant way, which means that it has the resource has to be versioned and immutable. What's the over under on how many people will actually use immutable tags for their OCI
Oh
objects?
yeah.
Because
Yeah, I
you know,
don't think it's a lot.
by default,
Yeah.
if when you throw a tag on, that tag
Yeah.
is mutable. You
Yeah.
can change it, and
Yeah,
you
you
can
can
put a different
rename those.
image on that tag.
Yeah.
But you can reference images by like a SHA that is their hash, which of course then is immutable, and so you can do your the purpose of that whole requirement is that then you can do a rollback and it
Yeah.
will work. And I actually think that the way that it's been implemented, it will work even if people just reference OCI objects by like a latest or whatever, because well, geez, okay, I think about it, because it depends on how they're doing it.
Yeah. It depends how. Yeah, exactly. Because yeah, well, when I was testing with it, right, there was never a latest tag, right? Like it would just
Yeah.
but I was just using ORAS, so maybe that's just like the side effect of ORAS. Like I didn't explicitly set latest. I just said,
Wait, ORAS?
yeah, it's the CLI tool to interact with an OCI registry for manifest, right? Like
Oh, okay.
yeah, I forget what it stands for, but it's like object something something something. Like Andrew, if you're watching this, please
He's
type it
pulling his
in.
hair out.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know the acronym, but it's basically a CLI way to write and read like YAML. I'm using YAML, but just like basic any storage, but they interacted as storage. But it didn't add the latest. I just gave it a tag, right? I gave it like a semver, and it just took only that tag, right? And so but yeah, so I wonder how much more, like you're talking about Kyverno, how much more of folks are going to be using like Kyverno to like reference, like because someone will reference a semver, right? But that actually underneath that tag points to an actual SHA, right?
Yeah.
How important that SHA is going to become now. Now that we're doing manifest, right? Like it's important in terms of like container images, right? I know people were doing container images, and like Kyverno will like just basically say, we'll take the whatever semver and it'll convert it into a SHA, so that way it's running as a SHA.
Mm-hmm.
What I wonder, like how much more that'll bubble up now into the application layer, right? Because that's more like a systems, like operations type of. But now, like we're at the application level of people releasing manifests. I wonder how much that SHA is going to become more important. And I think that goes back to what you were talking about, like the immutable tags and things like that. That becomes a more important. So I wonder how much more we're going to see that as well.
Well, and it will unlock, not in this version, but it'll unlock the ability to do signature verification.
Yep.
Inside of Argo CD, so we can verify that bundle before it gets deployed. That's not like right now you're at risk by using Git, because like Git sign stuff that's got SSL. It would be hard. It would be hard for somebody to be spoofing you, and you to get the wrong manifests from Git. But again, there are a lot of tools that help distribute OCI objects already. They work really well, and so you can do a lot of scale with it. And it is also easier for a lot of people to wrap their heads around pushing an OCI object and understanding like, oh, once I make that push, I've changed the source of truth. Whereas with Git, we do have a hard time getting people to understand, or not to understand, but getting them comfortable with what's in Git is what's deployed. So a lot of people, when they first start using Argo CD, They leave manual sync, no automated sync, because they want to be able to go and click the sync button when they're ready and see the diff. And part of that is that they're not comfortable with the idea that their Git repo reflects the reality of what's deployed. And so it takes a while to build up to that discipline. And part of getting there is separate out the application manifest from the infrastructure manifest, or the application layer, right? You're developing your binary, then you make an update, you push that binary, that new image, then you update the manifest, and they should be in a separate repository because their life cycles are separate. A lot of people struggle to do that. So having the OCI, using it as an OCI object, suddenly it's like, oh, okay, that's really easy for me. I can just push an OCI object and I can use that as a source of truth. And so it is closer to the way that a lot of people are used to working.
Yeah, it is actually really closer to like developer workflows, right? Like, so if you think about like, I code, I push, CI process runs, it builds me an artifact. Like let's say, fat jar or whatever, right? I can push that into like Artifactory, and it's like that's like very like we've been in that workflow for so long, right? Like it's kind of like embedded in kind of like conceptually in our heads. We can, but like for manifests, like it, like you said, there was some sort of cognitive dissonance on like, it's like, well, wait, like Git is like where things are constantly changing. Like why am I deploying from there? Like you said, like there was like that initial kind of pushback of like, no, Git is constantly changing. I don't want my infrastructure to constantly change. It's like, well, no, it's a different workflow, right? All right, let's take that out. And I think now that we have a similar workflow for manifests, right, for GitOps, I guess this like has a larger implication for GitOps, right? Even the Flux ecosystem, like they have OCI support as well. Like they have like now, like just as a GitOps person, like now we have kind of like a similar workflow, right? Like we have Git, right, that then we can render that manifest, and then we could push that into OCI, and then Argo points to OCI. That's kind of like the similar thought process, right? Like you said, like oh, okay, like we have our demarcation points, right, between each process.
And actually that's a good segue too, because should we recognize Flux in this equation? Because Flux actually started using OCI as a source of truth several years ago. Part of this is because they wanted to do signature verification. And it also, part of it is the security model of Flux is that things are being essentially rendered server side. So they're being deployed directly against a cluster, whereas Argo CD renders them in isolation, passes the manifests on to be applied. And so the security model and threat, profile for Argo CD versus Flux take two different approaches. Flux has kind of more, if you're rendering things server side, it has the ability to look values up, which is useful, but it is also a security concern. So it's not, I'm not necessarily saying one is better than the other. I think we've chosen with Argo CD to do it inside of Argo CD so that we avoid a lot of potential, issues of having manifest generation interact with a cluster. But Flux, we have to give it credit. Flux was the first one to have OCI support, and they kind of popularized this pattern.
Yeah, they popularized the pattern. And actually, so I was working with Blake, right? Like involved with like some of the considerations and things like that. And like you said, big shout out to Flux, because like a lot of the stuff, like the problems that like we had to figure out, like, well, what did Flux do? And like we could have been like, okay, like, well, we just kind of like for lack of a better term, kind of like de facto standardized on like kind of like what they were doing, because like I think they were also emulating what like Helm was doing, because I think Helm initially was like the first someone correct me if I'm wrong, but like the first tool in the ecosystem, right? To use OCI as OCI. So they kind of like set the precedence, and then Flux kind of emulated that, and then we kind of emulated. So we kind of came up with this de facto standard because there's certain considerations in terms of like, well, how do we tag? Because there's like tagging and certain annotations and metadata that you can add. It's like, well, how are we going to teach, quote unquote, teach end users how to tag their metadata correctly? I'm like, well, like if they're already using Helm and Flux and things like that, I think like like, just
Let's not
emulating that.
reinvent the wheel. Yeah.
Yeah, let's not reinvent the wheel, right? Like, so like you said, big kudos to Flux, because they had to like think about like the same issues that we were thinking about, like standardization and things like that. It's like, well, let's just emulate them. I think they I guess they did a lot of the hard thinking, right? Because then now like there's this kind of like standard, right? Like even if it's like unofficial. I was talking with I forget who the ORAS person from Microsoft was, but he said that like eventually I think like we should like as a
We should
CNCF, right?
formalize it.
Yeah, we should formalize like some sort of standard. It's like, okay, like if you're gonna run OCI's as storage for whatever in Kubernetes, like here's a standard. There's already a de facto standard, so it may, but we should probably open it up and have that conversation.
Well, as far as standards go, about 50 to 60% of Kubernetes clusters are using Argo CD, according to the latest Argo CD user survey, according to the Octopus Deploy GitOps end user survey, according to the CNCF survey. So whatever Argo CD does, probably going to become the standard.
Kind of probably be
Yeah.
just
but yeah, it is appreciate between these two tools. I don't think there's any animosity. I think we just we encourage people to use whatever they feel like makes the most sense. And hey, obviously, we're both big believers in Argo CD. We both work on Argo CD, and but I'm happy to give credit where it's due when another project does something well and does it earlier than us, and we can learn from that and say, hey, that's awesome.
Yeah,
we like that, and we're going to add that support in, and we'll get that OCI goodness coming, as Troy from the comments says, that OCI goodness.
Goodness. Yes.
So, okay, we talked about where OCI started. We talked about what it is. We talked about the impact on the rendered manifest pattern. We talked about some of the distributed nature and advantages of OCI. Are we missing any of the advantages or reasons why people might want to choose OCI to store their manifests?
Yeah, I think the biggest use case, I think, and we haven't touched on it yet, is that is for edge deployments or edge. So, I mean, the biggest one is edge, right? Obviously, this will like this is good for disconnected, but I think that's just like another topic altogether. But I think edge, I think, is a really good aspect of it, because like in general, the practice was like, okay, hey, you're gonna have like a Kubernetes on the edge and you're gonna have Argo at the edge. That implies that you're gonna need a Git repo on the edge, right? Like you're gonna have that like installation and management of Git, right? Like even if it's a stripped down Git, right? Like there's like it's not for better or worse, Git wasn't actually meant to be used the way we were kind of using it in GitOps.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it works great. Like you said, like there's like a lot of upside to it, but it wasn't really specifically designed for that. So even if you have a small installation on the edge, there's some, quirks on that. But I think like just, deploying now OCI at the edge, right? It's very, very smaller footprint. Like you said, you can make it like immutable tags, on the edge. You can, you have a simple payload. I think that footprint gets smaller, right? And I think the edge use cases, I think, is a big, I'm a big fan of like using OCI. Like that would be like the first thing if I was designing. I'd be like, okay, yeah, we're gonna need OCI at the edge, because that way you can sort of kind of control what gets deployed to what. I think that's like one big thing.
Yeah, we've seen Leonardo Miro gave a talk about using edge deployments with Argo CD in an air-gapped environment where you've got basically your Git repo on a thumb drive. We've done a bunch of setups like that. Dustin Van Buskirk from Octopus Deploy CodeFresh has done a bunch of those with customers. So it's something we've seen a lot of and have good experience with. But it is a lot more lightweight to say, here's a thumb drive with an OCI object, and it's signed. Right.
And it's signed. Yep.
Furniture, starts to become actually a lot more valuable in a use case where people are using SneakerNet to deploy things, right? SneakerNet because you're walking around on sneakers to plug things in, not because you're being sneaky.
Now you became being sneaky, and I think SneakerNet. That's an older term, right? Like that was even a quote unquote old term when I was, first starting in IT. So like we do have to like reintroduce that concept.
Reintroduce it,
Yeah. Because like I don't think people call those shoes sneakers anymore. I I don't think so.
Oh, they don't call shoes sneakers?
I don't know. We should poll the audience.
Do we need to
Do
call it
they-
like kicks net? 'Cause it's your
Kicksnet or
kicks?
something like in your kicks? Yeah.
What do the young people say?
Yeah. What do they say?
Tell
Yeah.
me, Christian, what are the young people saying
Yeah.
these days? What are they
Yeah.
calling
Okay.
shoes?
Yeah. Yeah. What do they say? Yeah.
Hello,
So,
fellow kids. Well,
hello,
yeah, I had a
yeah.
friend who was in. They were exploring in Cuba recently, and they were telling me there's no internet, and so for them to arrange where they were going to stay, they would go to like they had arranged for one place. I don't know how they started with the first place, but once they got to that place like started making phone calls and helped to arrange for them to go to the next place.
Yeah.
Back in the day, we had, in the US, we had Yellow Pages or whatever to look things up. But I read that there's a huge network, basically a sneaker net of people using thumb drives to do portable Netflix. Because like,
wow.
if you want to watch a movie, you
Yeah.
can't stream it. There's no internet.
Yeah.
And I know there are internets in town. Someone's watching from Cuba and they're like, I have internet, you jerk. But look, this is just what they told me. But so they're passing around these thumb drives with like movies and stuff to make Netflix basically on demand.
Yeah.
Movie probably don't have a subscription though. Anyway,
Probably not.
so yeah, Edge is a great use case, and the signing aspect becomes really useful in those cases because now you can do verification without, you don't have to trust the person bringing the thumb drive, right? You might need to trust them a little.
I mean, you might have some element of trust.
At least the binary, you don't, the image that's getting deployed, you can have some value in. So that's nice. Cool. So we've talked about the benefits. We talked about when it's coming, 3.1, which is currently the release candidate is out, and we'll have the full release, I think, is coming next week. And Christian, you actually wrote the blog post for 3.1.
Yeah. And also the release champion, I guess, for 3.1.
Ooh, congratulations.
Yeah.
That's a huge project. That's a lot of
it's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Shout out to to Alex G from Intuit, who's like my counterpart on the engineering side. He's doing a lot of the getting a lot of bothersome messages from me saying, "Hey, can you run that pipeline again? Hey, can you run that?" So
Alex is amazing. I've
he's
been
great.
So impressed how quickly he's come onto the project and become a force of nature. So shout out to Alex.
Yeah, shout out to Alex for sure. But yeah, 3.1 next week next week or the week after. My days are running together, but yeah.
So going into 3.1. You wrote the blog post. What are some other things that people should be excited about coming into 3.1? Obviously, OCI supports the biggest one.
Yeah, OCI support, I think, is the one of the bigger ones. I think also CLI plugins, I believe, is coming in to 3.1. And that was I believe the CLI
working on this a bunch.
Yeah. Natish was working on this, and it was actually that, and I think I wrote the proposal for that, but that was a byproduct of like OCI, because I'm thinking, well, Argo CD needs a way to like interact with these registries, right? And we don't necessarily wanted to put it in tree, because I think in general, I think and Kubernetes, kubectl did the same thing. It's like you don't want to like just like stuff everything in tree. It's like there has to be don't put every support for everything right in your CLI tool. So it's like, oh, let's have a plugin, and that way at some point someone down the line will write like some sort of interface to like interact with an OCI registry that is Argo CD friendly. Right now with ORAS, I have to I have to specify like tags and metadata and stuff like that Argo CD will understand. I say, well, it'd be nice if we have a CLI tool, so to do that automatically for me. But yeah, so that's that plugin feature where you can basically the same as a kubectl. So like if anyone is familiar with kubectl plugins, Same thing is coming for Argo CD, right? Where you can, write, something in your path that will do something with Argo CD. Argo CD CLI will pick it up. So I think
Yeah.
that's a good
I'm excited to see what else
feature.
people build with the CLI plugins, because there are a lot of possibilities for, you let your
Yeah, no, there's
imagination run wild. You can do a lot of cool stuff with it.
yeah, you can do like a lot of automation. I know that Jan is working on like the Argo CD agents, and he has like an agent CTL command on like Argo CD dash agent CTL. I'm like, well, you can actually put that, if you put
Inside
that
of
in your
Argo
path,
CD, boom.
yeah, you can actually, it can actually be a plugin now, like uh those type of things. So
Yeah. And as those things move into mainline support, we could potentially merge them and make it just ship with the binary. But the whole purpose of labs is let people build other stuff. And
yeah.
if it does really well, like application sets, then maybe it moves into the main repo and becomes part of the default installation.
Yeah.
And that's great.
What another thing that I actually really like that I think would be really cool is something that Pasha did, was that skip dry run on missing resource was only available as an annotation.
Oh, yeah.
So what what I used to do is I put in my customize as a common annotation, so everything gets it. But now you can actually it's actually a sync option, right? So he wrote it as a global sync option. It's like, which, like, all right, cool. Like now I don't need, speaking of like simplifying your manifests, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, now I can just put it in the application spec, and it'll apply to all of that. So I think that was really cool as well.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks for the shout out to Pasha. 3.1, we've also got improvements to Hydrator.
Oh, that's
coming
right.
on.
Yep.
And I think it's basically the improvement is a way to associate drag commits with code commits. So, and this is done with basically Git comments, I think. And and then it will add that metadata in, so you can see that extra information, which is nice.
That's really, really cool to be able to during the hydration part, like have some of the information bubble up into the UI, to be part of that metadata. Is especially if you're trying to like triage or like trying to connect, like, okay, which commit went with which version of the YAML that, so then you can actually dig down and go to the actual code. So I think that's really cool as well.
Before, you had to buy CodeFresh if you wanted that kind of functionality.
Yeah.
Now it's coming over.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
We got server-side apply stabilization. Server-side apply has been a pretty popular feature for Argo CD, because when you apply the manifests, instead of doing it client-side, you can do it server-side. That allows you to have more memory. You can have longer manifests. Also gives you better clarity about how the manifests will be afterwards, and like what changes might be happening server-side. And I know that there's some improvements here. I didn't fully follow those. I don't know if you have any more detail on that one to put you on the spot.
No, actually, for the server side stabilization, no. I know that server side apply is actually, I don't want to say new, but it's relatively new for Argo CD. And I think it was really during my time at Red Hat, I think it was really welcomed, because a lot of what ends up happening is that for something like OpenShift, where everything is based on the operator framework, there's like things managed, like manifests that are managed by the operator. Like there's just, so there was like, it was really hard to patch things with customize if you don't, because with customize, if you don't quote unquote own that manifest, you can't patch it, right? Like there's no but what's really cool with server side apply, I can then just store the patch, right? Like I don't have to use customize. I can just store the patch and it'll just like automatically apply that for me, because it'll use server side apply. So I'm glad that's getting getting updated, and I think people are using it, so it's getting more and more stable as we progress.
And it also has value for migrating manifests into Argo CD, because if they were created
you're right,
outside of Argo CD, they're going to be rendered a little bit differently. And so by using server side apply, you can take over those existing manifests, and you don't have to have the last applied, which takes up a lot of memory sometimes. So I know for a long time, I guess with Prometheus, when you would apply it and then go to take it over, it would almost always be too long for Argo CD to take on. You had to use server side apply. So that's another. That's been a feature for a while, but it looks like there's some stabilizations and improvement coming there, where there are a lot of little behaviors with server side apply that are a little bit different, and so sometimes those yielded surprises. And then the last thing for 3.1 that you highlighted, Christian, was the UI parameterization action.
Yeah, so it's really the not all. So like Argo CD is. I always tell people like Argo CD is kind of like what you get when I take kubectl away from you, but not all like, but not all kubectl actions were actually available on Argo CD, right? So like for example, I think the big one that's coming for the actions in the UI is to be able like to scale a replica, right? Like you'd actually have to go in and edit the YAML in order to get, but now you can actually scale it like from the UI. So so now you can get things like that, like more actions that people are used to using kubectl for. You're getting those now in the UI, right? So this is kind of like I think this is like the first attempt, right? Like it's basically they built shout out to, I forget the name. I don't even know how to. Someone from Deutsche Bank.
Ratul Basak.
Yeah. Whatever the
GitHub user
the
name.
GitHub user. Yeah. He that it was the first interface into it. And, he just kind of added the scale feature, but then that opens up the door for more and more actions, kubectl specific actions that people are used to.
Yeah, so we're starting with scale, but that'll open the door to adding other ones as well.
Yeah.
These are great additions. Obviously, if you have the chance, go try out 3.1 before it comes out. If you're still on 2.13, your support is coming to an end.
Yep.
So you're going to be moving to at least 2.14 to stay in support, or 3.0. And then, of course, as you mentioned, once 3.2 comes out in 3 months, there'll be no more 2x releases supported, and so at that point you will want to be migrated over to at least 3.0.
Yeah,
so
yeah, at some point you have to go to 3.0 in the coming months. So like if you're still, you might as well go to 3.0 for to stay on track if you don't want to be deprecated in 3 months for sure.
Yeah. I'll give a shout out to Reggie, who added in 3.1 new GitHub API metrics. This is something that actually came from a customer request of ours, where they kept on running out of Git API requests, and it's like kind of hard to figure out what's calling Git and making those requests. So we added those metrics, so that'll be nice to have in 3.1. Yeah,
that's another thing. Actually, we didn't really talk about like between like OCI and Git. It was like you do get rate limited if you're using like GitHub or GitLab or something. If you're not using like a self-hosted, you do get rate limited. And for sure, shout out to Reggie, because like that's really hard to debug on Argo CD. Mm-hmm. So with 3.1 now you get those additional metrics so you can see what's going on, which is really cool.
It's especially an issue when you're using application sets. Like if you're using the pull request generator, it's going to hit the API to get all the pull requests. Then it's going to go and look at every single one of those pull requests. So there's a whole bunch more API requests.
Yeah.
Then for each one that it looks at, it's going to do it again to go and actually pull whatever other manifests need to be deployed. If you're using a matrix generator, it's going to do it twice for each entry. So it's suddenly it's like, oh, I'm using thousands of these. And OCI, that's a good pullback to OCI, because rate limiting those challenges you're going to have an easier time with. But obviously you can still use OCI object with a pull request generator and just use an OCI object to pull in as well. But depending on the situation, that may or may not make sense. All right, I think, did we cover everything with OCI that we needed to? Is there anything else we should talk about with OCI?
I'm thinking we should probably the only thing I can think of, and it will probably be like warrant its own episode for you, is like what are the implications with OCI and like GitOps promotions, with respect to like, how does that workflow change? To me, it seems like it'll simplify the process a little bit, because like now you're just you're adding kind of like an not only say adding, but like you have like this additional step of rendering, and now to like do promotion is kind of like you're just like switching tags, from like this version of this version of this version of that version. Obviously, in as you know, promotions are like more complex than just like switching the tags.
Yeah.
But I think like the end process, right, like that kind of like that final kind of like promotion process. I wonder how those. I haven't really played around with it like with OCI, trying to do like promotions, but I think I wonder what the application is there, and like what how it'll mess it'll mess with that process, right? Whether it be positive or negative, like we don't know.
Well, that leads to a question from Troy, who says, did you talk about tools that already exist and how they fit into CI for OCI?
Well, I think we touched on like Hydrator a little bit. I think Hydrator.
Yeah,
we
mentioned using CI to bundle and
Yeah.
sign, and for signing, what's that tool called? OCI.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. It's like Sigstore uses that tool, right?
Yeah. Why can't I remember the name of it? I made a plugin for it, and
there's a plugin for
is it just called? Oh, it's Cosign.
Cosign. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, Cosign is the tool for signing and verifying OCI objects.
Yeah.
And used it a lot for Docker images.
Yeah.
But now you can start using it for your OCI bundles going into Argo CD. Of course, we don't yet have verification in Argo CD. PRs could be open. Yeah. And obviously just building with CI, just any generic CI tool you can build these objects with as well. A comment from the community, Ilya asks, wet commit, dry commit, hydrator, and he's referencing your blog post, Christian. The author is sure to speak this language of birds, but for the general public, I would like more explanation of what this means.
Yes. I saw that comment. I always find it hilarious, is because it's like, well, what is hydrator? It's like I'm talking about a feature like hydrator, and it's like, like how do you explain that simply, right? Like you kind of almost have to kind of know what it's kind of like explaining what does a differential does, like you talk about differential, right, like on a car, and it's like, well, can you put it to me, can you put it to me without jargon? I was like, well, it's kind of hard to describe what a differential is without like using all the jargon of what a car is.
Yeah.
It's
well, so okay, I think we've covered hydrator, the difference between dry and wet. Dry manifests or do not repeat yourself, if you want to go to that level of acronym, basically means the basic manifests that you write, but they are not rendered. So this is what Argo CD today takes and has taken for a long time. You can point it at a Git repo that has a Helm chart in it to customize whatever. It'll pull that, and then it needs to render it. It needs to run an operation. So Helm template, a customized build, whatever, and that's going to generate hydrated manifests. These are manifests that are fully rendered. And so these are the ones that are actually getting applied to your Kubernetes cluster. So the difference between a dry commit and a wet commit, a dry commit would be the change that you make to your base configuration. And then the wet commit would be what those are rendered into, then being committed to your Git repository, right? Okay. So, Anne asks, does the new scale feature in the UI support Argo rollouts or just basic resources like deployment?
Yeah, I think it's just basic resources right now, as from deployment. Yeah.
And I'm sure rollouts will be a highly requested feature that will come sooner than later.
Yeah. Rather than later, yeah.
Let's see. Oh, this person says we're evaluating the release Oh, wow, this is a longer comment. I don't know if I can do all of these. We are evaluating the RC in our staging instance as we use several application sets to generate apps and massively more in our production instance. I noticed on Argo CD application view page, if the app was generated by an application set, that it displays and a pop-up error message in the UI. This is probably the effect of integrate progressive sync feature as it introduced a new call. requiring addition of an RBAC policy allowing to get parent applications set. Oh, so this sounds like you might need to update
the RBAC
your RBAC policy
yeah.
for this.
That's actually good to know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Might want to throw that one on the release notes. I'll share that. That comment's also on the blog post. And I'll send that over to you, Christian, as you, since you are the release champion on this guy.
That's right. Yeah, no, that would be good for the notes for sure.
Yeah, good to put in the notes that you might need to update RBAC policy.
Yeah, I'll double
if
check
that's the full thing.
Too.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Christian, I think we covered OCI. This was a pretty good session. Hopefully people enjoyed the podcast. Looks like we had pretty sustained viewership throughout. Appreciate everybody asking questions and commenting. Christian, you got anything to plug? Do you want to play us a song? Maybe grab your
play a song. So I think the only thing to plug right now is that I do have a book, Argo CD Up and Running, that I actually wrote with Andrew Block, right? We talked about Andrew Block from Red Hat as well. So we kind of collected our respective experiences working with end users, working with our respective customers on Argo CD, and kind of came up with kind of like a quick way to get up and running, right? Like kind of like let's cut through all the, yes, you can do everything with Argo, but like, what do you really want to do, right? And so I have the book, Argo CD Up and Running. It is actually now being reviewed. I guess now we're doing the book club, right? So the Kubernetes book club. So for those for those that are doing the Kubernetes book club, that book is being featured. My book's being featured. We're doing a session every Thursday. We're going chapter to chapter, right? It was a big undertaking. I can't believe I committed to 11 weeks of this, but weekly we're gonna be. It's a book club, so you have to read a chapter a week, and then we discuss that chapter. So we're on chapter 3 this week. So for those that want to go, the Kubernetes book club, easy first hit on Google.
Is that like a Twitter account? Well, I didn't even know about the Kubernetes book club.
So Carlos Santana runs it from AWS. And he has a LinkedIn page, but I don't think he has a Twitter page.
There's a CNCF page, so I'll throw it in the chat.
Yep,
CNCF book club for folks that want to check it out and follow along with the adventure here.
So that's nice. Check that out.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Christian, for coming in. A little bit of a blast from the past. You and I used to host a podcast together, and always happy to hang out with you. And enjoy the LA weather. I'll enjoy the Utah weather, and we'll see everybody next time on Argo Unpacked.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.